Welcome to another episode of GQ Speaks, your go-to platform for insightful conversations, captivating stories, and thought-provoking discussions. GQ is a series of experiences, and we're just making sense of that as we go along. That is what we're doing here, one conversation at a time. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into our episode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another very special episode of GQ Speaks. I'm Ibrahim Absar from the class of 2026, and I'm joined here today by Chen.
Hi everyone, this is Kim. Nice to speak to you all.
So we've gathered here today to discuss the outcome of the referendum, the results of which just came out yesterday evening. According to the outcome of the referendum, the amendments regarding the SGA experience mandate will be overturned. And the SGA recognizes that while the referendum did not meet the required minimum threshold, as an exception, they recognize the significance of the votes cast against the amendment. And in total, we had 214 students participating, the majority of whom voted in favor of reversing the amendment. So as a means to respect the majority student opinion in this case, the SGA eventually ended up reversing their original decision with regards to the referendum.
Yes, and just to be clear, Ibrahim, you were just reading from the email that the SGA sent us, right?
Absolutely.
They have such a peculiar way of framing this, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that can be argued against, but like my first initial impressions when I read that email was basically the opposite of what I think it meant. I kind of like understood that the referendum just came out in favor of the amendment as opposed to against the amendment, because I started off reading the second paragraph and I was like, while the referendum did not meet the required minimum threshold, I was like, okay, so does that mean that it's not passed?
Right.
So there was a significant amount of reading that I needed to do, read between the lines and figure out what it actually means.
Yeah, it's certainly worded very ambiguously, right? And I mean, I think you bring up a very good point in terms of them mentioning there being a threshold and that the threshold was not met.
Yeah.
Now let's look at the threshold. What threshold is it? Right? It's a threshold that the SGA, has come up all entirely by themselves and without any student inputs, and actually with student opposition saying that it will be practically impossible to have 50% turnout rates, even for such an issue that has garnered so much attention, right? Because you have to take into consideration just how many students really care about SGA in general, right? And so I think the SGA in their email has worded in a way that is very undermining of the significance of this vote.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah.
But let's start off with the student response from yesterday. I would say it was very wholesome once everyone was gathered out there for iftar in the atrium, and then everyone immediately started shouting once the referendum was out, like in a celebration kind of a sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, from that it became apparent to me that okay, it has been overturned. So that was first. And then I started to like kind of like make sense of the reasoning that the SG outlined behind it. That even though it was not, meeting the required threshold that they've said, they've still respected the majority student opinion in this case, and kind of like used that to sort of make amendments here.
Rather reluctantly, I would say. Or maybe when you edit the podcast, you might want to edit out my sarcasm and...
No, let's keep it as it is. I want to keep the sarcasm inside.
I feel like I'm already much of a villain character. I couldn't use less, hate for my cynicism and sarcasm. But anyway, let's...
That's what it is.
But let me tell you how I think, how I feel about this result.
Let's start from that.
Right? Because you just described that there was a celebratory mood after the result was announced. That mood actually completely escaped me.
Okay.
When I saw the result, I had been expecting it. But when I did see it, I just felt, almost a little lost. Okay. I was like, what's next? Because there's no indication of what happens next. And I think, judging from SGA response and student response, that the matter ends as it is, right? The matter ends with the end of the referendum. And I don't know how I think about that. Well, I do know how I think about that. I am deeply unsatisfied.
Okay.
And honestly, I don't think it should end here.
So, but a lot of people in our audience might take, this statement of yours as kind of like uprooting the what's it called, like the public outroad once again. Like for the past 2 weeks or something, we had been like going back and forth in terms of heated conversations in WhatsApp group chats, and ever since the referendum, like we've probably settled that issue towards that sense. But the very context and the very opinion that you're bringing to the table here today is sort of from my understanding that again it's addressing the root causes of some of the contentions that you had, and it's kind of like there's a bigger picture to it, I guess, that you're kind of like going for here, and so there's some deep rooted problems that need to be addressed towards that end. But isn't that in a lot of ways like from my understanding gonna start those heated conversations back on and just like pick up where they left off in that sense?
I'm very glad that you brought it up, Ibrahim. I think there are several things we need to unpack here and now. Number one is, what conversations did we really have in the past 2 weeks? And were these conversations meaningful or significant in any sense? And second, you said that, okay, there's like my words can be interpreted as being insightful or, however you want to call them. I'm not sure if that's the case. I'm not sure if that's what we should be worrying about as of now. And personally, I think that perhaps the SGA no longer needs to worry about the public outcry, because as we see from the result, right, everyone just breathes, some fresh air, and I think most people have concluded this episode, right? As bitter as it was, as contentious as it was, I think most people are ready to move on. Right, and I'm simply, I think, sharing my perspective on this issue and why I don't think that should be the case.
I see.
Okay, so, that was very weird. Okay. I don't think that's how I should say this. So that was the first part, right? We have to look at whether or not we had the type of conversations that needed to be had. And second, if the conversations we had were not the ones that we should have had, then isn't there a need for us to have these conversations now as public mood, public opinion has settled down, right? And perhaps everyone can look at this with a calmer head and more sober mind. That's my take, yes.
So here's my takeaway from that. So you're kind of bringing up the case that it's really not that black and white as it seems as of now, in terms of like, okay, the referendum being passed out in against the SDA amendment or in favor of it, like whatever way it was structured, it's not as black as white as that. And there's something that's a deeper root cause or a root problem that we need to address here. So I want you to flesh that out for me and help us understand kind of like, what those root problems essentially are that you think are worth addressing, A, and B, worth having a conversation about. Because since the past few days, the kind of like, tempers that have flared in the different WhatsApp group chats, from my understanding, they have been like directionless. So there's a particular direction that you need to, give those kind of arguments. And that's the whole reason why this whole platform that we've curated is essentially there for, to kind of streamline those conversations and see which direction they're headed in. So going back to the root causes, what do you feel like are the root causes for some of these amendments and some of these problems that we have here right now?
If you will permit me to use the example of this amendment, right, let me tell you what the root issue is by sort of unpacking the entire event of this amendment fiasco, if you will. So let me say it this way, that if you look at how the SGA handled this entire thing, you can probably see a couple issues. So I think it is helpful for us to look at how the SGA handled this moment of crisis, if you will, and see if that tells us about the underlying issues. So how did the SGA address the problem? Well, of course, they called for a referendum. Prior to the calling of a referendum, they hosted a tabling event in the atrium with, according to their own words, right, it had very few participants. I was one of the few participants. And I went there and I talked with not just SGA members, right, but very bizarrely, ex-SGA members.
Okay.
I spent 10 minutes or so talking with Nagla and the other current members. However, the other 40 minutes were spent between me and ex-SGA presidents, as well as student life faculties.
Okay.
And there's a reason for that. I found the ex-members to be much more willing and much more engaging in conversations. And that my conversation with current SGA members, for whatever reasons, tended to be not very ideal in terms of we were merely repeating our own respective positions. And there were very little back and forth, very little meaningful communications between us. While, for instance, let me give the example of my conversation with ex-president Benjamin, who's, I think, a student favorite. So he actually mentioned to me something that I did not hear from current members. He told me that he believed that this amendment was good because it would allow willing, how would you say it, potential runners for presidents to serve as class representatives first.
Okay.
And there has been always a shortage of class representatives. No one's willing to be class reps. And that if you look at our batch, the class of 2026, we had no people running for class reps. So what they got to do is they actually appointed 2 students to serve as class reps.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So Benjamin told me
Without elections, that was?
without elections, no.
Okay.
There were no elections because nobody volunteered.
Ah, I see.
Now, Benjamin told me that if you had this amendment, right, then people who wanted to run for presidents would have to become class representatives first and therefore solving, if you will, this issue at hand. So I looked at him at the time and I said, Benjamin, that you just told me was the most compelling reason I've ever heard in favor of the amendment. And no current SGA member told me that, despite days of communications before that tabling event. I think that speaks.
But going back to the question here about the root cause.
Yes.
If you could just flesh out the root cause here.
And the root cause is precisely that I heard nothing as compelling as Benjamin's reason from the current members.
So you feel like there's a lack of communication between the current SGA framework and the student body?
Not a lack of communication, but a lack of meaningful conversations. If you would, for instance, if you just take out your WhatsApp group chats or you look at the emails sent by the SGA, you could see that those communications were not meant to communicate. They were simply announcements. They were announcements aimed at either addressing public discontent or, proposing could-be solutions such as the referendum or announcing the results of the referendum. But if you look at current SGA members, they had minimal conversations with students. And if you look at the fights that occurred in the student group chats, you could see that the fights occurred in between students and not students and SGA members.
Okay, but let me give you my journalistic take on it. Because I've heard the other side as well.
Yeah.
And the argument that they're bringing up is the fact that the representatives from the SGA are essentially representatives of the student body. And once you have them appointed in their current positions, whether that be as class representatives, whether that be as, PRO, vice president, whatever, like president and stuff like that, they're essentially representing not just themselves, but essentially a whole batch of students and a bigger group in that sense.
Do you know why that does not fly?
What exactly?
We just had a referendum with the majority of the voters voting against the amendment, yet those same representatives voted in favor of the amendment. That's why we had this entire fiasco.
So
if I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
And would just say that there has been an inconsistency when it comes to that type of student representative conduct in terms of when you're supposed to represent the student body, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that's the minimal observation that can be made, is that student representatives reminding themselves to,
actually represent the student opinion
when they are responding to the event, not when their votes led to the event created.
But I don't see any like mechanisms being put into place in which the class representatives, for instance, they can sort of kind of understand what the batch opinion is about certain things. Like, for instance, this amendment. Like, how would they understand the public opinion without reaching out to people or like having a mechanism in place that's gonna give them the opinion of the student body?
I feel like you're complicating the matter, Ibrahim. You know how we did things back then? We just asked. It's not very difficult to talk to people. I certainly hope not. Right? I feel like we have a tight campus. We have a campus with not too many students in it. And, each representative, when you actually divide the numbers, has roughly 50 to 60 students to actually represent and vote for. Okay. And, of these, I feel like you can get a very good view, a very good sort of assessment of where students stand if you just ask, say, 5 to 10 people. The student opinion can easily be gauged if you just talk to not very many people, right? And I think even that was missing. And that was part of the reason why we had this fiasco, right? We had this controversy because prior to voting, the SGA members did not gauge public opinions. They did not feel like there was a need for them to verify, hey, are we really, doing what the students want?
Okay.
Or are we just imposing our thoughts, whatever those thoughts might be, on the student body?
Because again, like as we saw from the referendum, the public opinion is very clear in this case. So again, there's a lack of mechanism I see here in terms of the class representatives actually representing the sample size that they're supposed to represent. And kind of come up with, an opinion based out of that, keeping like their personal, opinions aside. Because again, if they're elected or selected for a certain kind of position, in the case of the class of 2026 representatives, for instance, again, as you mentioned, they were just appointed. There was no election for that, so we can't really hold them accountable for, being out there in terms of the student body actually choosing them and sort of like being willing to have them represent them in this case.
But Ibrahim, you have to forgive me for being repetitive. This is a point I really want to hammer across. That is, how hard is it to just talk to people? Right? Talking to people doesn't actually require you to be an elected student official.
No, I get that, but I just want to take things a step back and just sort of go back to the elections. Once, no one is willing to stand up for the class of 2026 representatives and people don't really have someone to vote for, like, what kind of message does that send across in terms of the student body not being actually interested or invested in the whole framework?
I'm glad that you brought it up. The problem lies in the people who had not even voted in this referendum. Remember, less than 50% of the people voted in the referendum. What about the other part that did not vote? What were they thinking? And I actually talked to them. I talked to, like I told you, I think roughly around 10 people.
Okay.
So all of them are seniors or juniors, so I'm not sure if they're representative of sophomores and freshmen. But let me share with you what they think.
Okay.
None of them support the amendment either. Not a single one of them supports the amendment. All of them have told me that they think this amendment is foolish, is up to no good, if I may just quote directly from them. One of them actually was the president of his high school SGA, and he said that to eliminate competition in his high school years, he imposed the exact same amendment. And that actually succeeded in his high school because none of his classmates reacted to the amendment. So he was able, throughout his high school year, to serve as president. So he told me that. But when I asked him if he'd like to share, he said no. And why was he not willing to share? And why was any of them not willing to vote? They told me that they all think this is a futile process, that they could not care.
Promotes exclusivity? Is that what you're saying?
No. Those people simply found no reason for them to vote. They just don't care about it. It is of no relevance to them. And actually, some of them looked at me and asked, Kim, why are you so invested in this? They looked at me with this slight notion of disapproval.
Okay.
As if I could have spent my time better. And some of them told me, look, there are so many important stuff going on out there. And yet, look, what are we preoccupied with? Fighting over this random amendment drafted by a random organization. And it's just petty. That was their reaction to it. Right? So, well, that was sort of the feedback I got from my surveys. If you will.
Like, again, projecting that question forward, like, why were you so invested in it?
Why was I so invested in it? Okay, this does require me to give a very good reason. So, I served as a former class representative back in freshman year. And I think that was the trajectory of many SGA members, ex-members, namely that they went into, SGA as this rising freshman, running elections in the very first month of their Georgetown journey, with a view of, okay, I'm going to be involved in this community, right? I'm going to serve in this community. And through their journey, they found out that, okay, student government is not what I thought it was. It's not as relevant. There's no power to it. You have no relevance whatsoever. Your work is artificially created. There's no need for your work.
Okay, that's a pretty strong statement that you're saying over
The
there.
faculties, because, okay, this was the part that I wish we had included earlier, but, since we arrive at this point naturally in the conversation, I want to give you sort of a breakdown of what the SGA actually does. And I think not many people are actually aware of that. And so if you look at the fight that occurred in group chats, whenever people were discussing what's actually needed to be an SGA member, they would say, oh, leadership, big words, teamwork, coordination, whatever. And I think they were able to do that precisely because most people had no idea what SGA actually does, So let me give you a breakdown really fast. The SGA can be broken up into two bodies. One is the SAC, SAC, which basically approves student event funding requests. And the other one is SLC, which is responsible for communicating between students and faculties, basically voicing all student concerns and suggestions to faculties. And then faculties will deliberate on whether or not to act upon these concerns. So that's the breakdown.
Okay.
Well, first of all, do we really have to have a SAC to take care of student affairs, to take care of student funding requests? Not precisely, right?
But based out of my experience, I say that you need that kind of, like a bridge between the staff at student body in this case and someone to kind of like a voice within the students to kind of understand and put like priority to certain like events, club events or like other external events that you may have. Just someone who has an understanding of what those events are meant for, how to prioritize them, how to allocate budgets to them. So towards that sense, you need a liaison between, students and faculty or staff in that case.
I 100% agree with you, Ibrahim, but I like to remind you of the existence of student life and the various employees we have over there, and whether or not they're recent graduates who are very, very familiar with campus culture and current events and generally what students want. And if you look on the other hand, in terms of being a bridge, there are things office hours. I dare say that most faculty members on campus are very welcoming of student conversations or conversations with students. very eager to hear from students, very eager to, act on students' behalf. Now, I'm not denying that the existence of a bridge is necessary.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that this bridge doesn't have to be the SGA. And the SGA, I hope at this point I've established, really, really is not that unique or necessary, which is certainly a strong point. And feel free to edit this out
opinion, but no, you're going to
for your podcast, right?
We're going to keep that in. No worries.
Sure. And
This is a free space at the end of the day. By the way, we're welcoming of bold opinions.
yes, I know. I'm certainly, I've certainly voiced many strong, bold opinions.
As you should, honestly.
I don't know if I should, honestly. I don't think this is a healthy lifestyle, But on, coming back to the discussion.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not even calling for a dissolution of the SGA, although that idea has been floated around, including by me.
Okay.
But I'm just saying that self-awareness is probably something that we should have.
Okay.
And I think a level of self-awareness is very needed in how SGA conducts itself. Let me just throw that out here. I will prove that later and we'll elaborate on that point. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
That was the breakdown of sort of SGA job, SGA work.
Yeah.
And so I just like to dispute the idea that you need some kind of very unique leadership experience or teamwork experience. I'm talking about the amendment, of course, and that's the idea of the amendment, that you need to have served in the SGA to be able to run for leadership positions in the SGA, because those positions require a significant level of expertise, a significant level of familiarity with the SGA work, so much so that you actually cannot get that experience, get that qualification from elsewhere, no matter where you work. Because if you don't work in the SGA, it's a no-no. You don't get the qualifications. Right? So I just like to dispute that amendment and the presumptions of that amendment, even very briefly.
According to your opinion, the amendment was taking us another step further in the wrong direction?
Of course, that would be, very generous. I just told you my anonymous friend's opinion, his take on this issue, and that, if he would just apply his experience, this would done completely to just annihilate competition and to make the organization more exclusive, and no other reasons.
So you're definitely rooting for a bigger cause here. And from my understanding, there are certain underlying issues within student life in general across GQ that you're trying to point out here. Not just SGA or SAC or SLC or anything of that sort. These are all obviously tools in terms of, contributing to that problem. So I just want to talk about that problem for a little bit and see why, conflicting views towards the role of the SGA that you have, the student life's proposals and student calls for dissolution and stuff like that. What are their relevance here?
Do you know why I brought up student life earlier? It's because my experience in SGA and including in the recent tabling event during my conversations with SGA members and ex-members, I found out, so there is this very entrenched belief inside the SGA that student life is something you have to fight against with all your might. I don't think...
Wait, are you saying that's like an SGA kind of...
Yeah, it's an SGA kind of thing. And I know it's never talked about outside of the SGA, but, first of all, from my own personal experience,
opinions.
It's not a bold opinion. It is merely an observation, and I'm speaking from 100% experience with 100% truthfulness. Actually, more than 30% of my my time serving as the SGA representative, every meeting, more than 30% of the time was spent discussing on how the SGA can fight against the encroachment of student life and preserve their independence and autonomy, and how, if it's possible, can we get more power from student life. More than 30% of the time of the SGA is spent on discussing such matter. I understand that I'm talking about a completely new concept to most of the listeners, but this is exactly how SGA conversations are had on student life and how to fight back against student life.
Again, bold statements here, bold statements.
Look, I had made bold statements before, but these are 100% factual.
Mm-hmm. And as someone who's represented the class of 2026 in the student body and the SGA,
As someone who still has great, significant contact with current and former members, I can say that after my tenure, this thing has not changed at all. It makes you wonder a little bit why there's such a conflict, right? Why is there such a conflict? It's because their roles are repetitive. Their roles are repetitive. Their components are very similar in terms of, students, literally just students. And at the same time, they're sort of created, they're also in the same space, if you think about it. Student SGA meetings are had in student life. And very frequently, SGA affairs do tend to involve student life officials and faculty, such as Uday. Right? He does play some sort of a overseer, the role of an overseer in SGA affairs. Yes, but he's also this figure greatly resented in SGA. And Uday's trying to take away, Uday's trying to tell us what to do. Uday's, taking away our money, stuff like that. It's a dynamics that is really, really interesting and not many people know.
With the amendment, I think we kind of saw the effect that you're just describing over there to get more pronounced, but not in between the SGA and the student life, but now in between the students and the SGA in this sense. That the role that you're describing, student life, or the kind of picture SGA has in mind of student life, according to you, that essentially kind of became the point of contention between students and SGA now at this point.
If I may just continue to bore you with that student life fiasco, not fiasco, but the student life SGA conflict. Student life actually had a very, very different proposal. It's like they're on the opposite ends of the same spectrum. You know what student life's proposal was, according to Nagla? She told me that, if you don't want to have this amendment, then you can have Uday's amendment, which was, you would not believe it. This is what she said, and I'm taking her for truth. So Uday proposed that you basically have a lottery.
A lottery?
You randomly select whoever volunteered to run as class reps or class presidents. You have a lottery. You don't have campaigns. You don't have elections. You just put the names of whom are running for any position, and you shuffle them in a box, and then you pick out the names, and they will be serving the respective positions. That was Uday's proposal, according to Nagla.
Wow.
If you think about it, it's the direct opposite, right, to the SGA amendment.
In every way.
Every way. One was to sort of hype up the,
the experiential part of
and the selection process, right? Make it more exclusive. Make it, a more demanding in some way, right? More exclusive. And Uday's was, let's get rid of the selection process. And that tells you also about how the work of SGA is perceived, right? Because definitely if student life thinks that no qualifications is needed and all you need is pure luck and the lottery, that speaks volume to the type of work they think SGA is doing, right?
Okay, going back to my question now.
Yes. Sorry for the...
No. It actually builds up perfectly to what you're saying. Because I just want to point out the energy that we've seen in the student body ever since, the amendment and its reversal and all of that. It really kind of defeats the argument about the students not being invested in the SGA's work or whatever they're doing, or how it essentially ends up affecting them. Because we saw here that if it actually, ends up sort of benefiting one group over the other, the students will have an uproar against it. They will definitely, call that out. So there is definitely a channel that we're seeing being developed within the students to sort of voice their concerns and actually be invested in things. And it was not just you who's obviously arguing with this, whole opinion against the SGA in the group chats. There were tons of other students with you, rallying around, just projecting the same kind of energy. So isn't that essentially defeating the argument about students not being invested in in this whole dynamic of, you know, SGA, or like whatever the hypothetical role of SGA is in this case, whether that be, like, you know, coined as SGA or like anything else in that case, even if you're advocating for the dissolution, I mean.
No, I'm not advocating for the dissolution. I just think some serious reform is needed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But there's definitely student interest here that I would like to point out.
Oh yeah, obviously. I think this event has generated, unprecedented attention among the student body. I dare say that it has not occurred, at least in the past, at least since I entered Georgetown.
Yeah.
Right.
And the whole argument against like lack of engagement and, you know, lack of interest, that essentially falters. That's
Right.
what I'm essentially saying.
Right. That part goes completely unanswered. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, look, actually on that note, I think it's either in the email or announced in the group chats that SJ will be hosting a weekly tabling event.
Yeah.
System to
That is part of the
improve engagement. But did you know that they had tabling events before? When Nagla told me that, I was like, really?
Yeah.
I reacted exactly like you did. But you know, they said, yeah, they do it bi-weekly. I was like, what? Bi-weekly? You were somewhere available
Yeah.
in public every 2 weeks? And he said, yeah, they handed out Karaks. You remember Karak table in the atrium?
Oh yeah. SGA conversations and Karak, I think that rings a bell.
Yeah, no,
I
now
remember
they
seeing
do.
like posters of it, but like
Yeah.
never really.
Turns out those were the tabling events that were supposed to improve SGA student engagement. Did you think they achieved their purpose?
In terms of the amendment and it being overturned, I would say definitely not.
No, not just that, but like we had to think about what the hell that Karak event was. You know, the Karak tables were the SGA tables. I don't think that occurred naturally to everyone.
Yeah.
I just don't think. Look, some part of that must have been so wrong that although I've been taking Karak from the atrium every 2 weeks,
Yeah.
I had no idea, first of all, that it was the SGA hosting the tables. And the second, you know, they achieved absolutely nothing.
Mm.
You know, it's crazy.
And you can't blame, you know, students anymore, I would say.
I just,
Because and anything that this whole episode has taught us about is that students are invested. Students do care. Students really have an opinion in this case. It's just a matter of how you're involving them in the whole procedure, how well you're representing them, and how much hurt do you make them feel.
Yeah.
That's really the kind of like, you know, key drivers of SGA engagement in this case. So
look,
Karak and conversations wouldn't really help in that along those.
I don't think they help. And I think, look, Karak and conversation is probably 90% Karak and 1% conversation. I don't know what students have been having that 1% of conversation, because it certainly was not me. And I was never asked, never approached
Yeah.
whenever we take Karaks. And, you know, I was actually interested in the Karak events. I was like sitting there like, who's giving out Karak? So I just watched.
Mm.
And I didn't see any conversations going on. I just saw people coming and going, taking Karak. You know, but you know, it is what it is. And Benjamin, actually, I think both me and Benjamin had some insights on this. Benjamin shared with me, because he was in favor of the amendment. He said, you know, oh, these students, they have so many troubles and concerns that you need to take care of. Right? He told me that he couldn't remember how many calls he received about empty water tanks, and, you know, how many times he had to contact security to, you know, just fill the water tanks. You know, that's the type of work that Benjamin was doing. And I don't mean to downplay it. You know, I don't mean to downplay it. I like to repeat myself, because it is the very little work that SGA is capable of doing in terms of just, you know, just doing the very basics. Telling the security, right, that the water tank needs to be refilled because you have been told by another student. You know, it's just that transmission. I don't know. I don't even know what you call it. You're like the button on the table that students can press when they're not sure who to go to, you know, voice their concern, no matter how small or negligible that concern is. And that's the type of work that the SGA was doing, certainly, back in Benjamin's time and my time. I sat there during my tabling events talking to people. I don't think I had karak. Me and the other SGA members, we sat there and we just talked to people. At the time, I knew nobody. I just held high that SGA, piece of paper, and I wrote, SGA tabling event, come talk to us if you have any concerns. And I talked to people.
Yeah.
I actually met some of my best friends in GUQ being the representative listening to people's complaints. I knew none of them at the time, and somehow through this, tabling, I got to know a lot of friends, and that's what SGA is supposed to be. But judging from the current fiasco and our, observations, none of that is true anymore. None of that is true anymore.
Perfect. On that very note, I would like to take this conversation towards a conclusive note. Firstly, what happens next from this point onwards? And secondly, would we see Mr. Kim Chen standing up for the next SGA elections?
Look, first of all, your second question, because that's a more pressing matter. No, I'm not going to run. Because really, every time I hear from my friends, people are not willing to engage, could not get bothered enough to engage. Every time they ask me why I'm so invested, a part of me agrees with them. Mm-hmm. A part of me think I'm wasting my time. I've better stuff to do. I've pressing work, research, internship, whatever, test prep. And, I just don't think it's a wise, rational decision to invest myself in SGA shenanigans in my senior year. So no, I'm not running. And frankly, at this point, a part of me is exhausted from this entire episode, So that was to your second question. On your first question, what happens next? Personally, I think some serious conversations are in place. Need to be in place. Not the kind of karak and tabling type of thing, No karak. Just get rid of the karak. Actually talk.
Oh, come on.
How difficult it is to talk. How difficult it is for you to talk, right? So some talking is in order.
More talking, less karak?
More talking, less karak, please. You give people diabetes. But like serious conversations, not the type that we had seen in WhatsApp groups. Those they go to nowhere,
and
they descend to such low level of junior high insulting and shouting match.
Couldn't agree more.
And look,
that's the whole premise on which this whole podcast club is built, by the way. Let me just put that out there.
Yes, right. Yeah, it is. But no, it's not just because of the nature of WhatsApp groups. But in this process, the SGA has been insulating itself from group discussions. The SGA don't get involved, or at least get involved very minimally with group chat discussions, right? So you just see students shouting against students, right? They don't have the people to talk to. Right? That's why I think that's at least a big reason why we had so much tension building up in the air in between different groups of students. It's because they're supposed to be talking to the SGA, but the SGA is simply not there. I think that's a big reason why we had all those nasty fights. And frankly, I think that's concerning. That's very concerning. I think that's definitely the number one issue the SGA should strive to address moving forward. I don't know if they have plans. I understand this is the end of the semester, or at least we're approaching the end of the semester, final month. I have lots of work to do. But look, for anyone who wants to run, this is the number one issue.
Perfect. And I think that's a good note to end on.
Hopefully.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I understand that this has been really last minute, but again, it really puts a lot of things into perspective, because with the first episode we had in mind, we essentially wanted to give the students a platform to essentially voice their concerns. But I think with this one, the kind of broader question that we're bringing into the mix is that it's not as black as white as it seems. There are certain like underlying issues that still need to be addressed. And the whole amendment fiasco that we saw wasn't really like a one-time thing. it's something that has deeper kind of like, roots to it that we kind of need to understand and address moving forward so that the whole community can flourish in the best possible way.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of GQ Speaks. We hope you've gained valuable insights and inspirations from our conversation today. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to follow us on our Instagram page at GQ_speaks and be sure to leave a review on Spotify to show your support.